It was a cold November night when Sophie, 8 years old, approached the table of the Michelin-starred restaurant in London where Valentina Ashworth, CEO of England's most prestigious fashion empire, was dining. The little girl had a perfume bottle to sell on the street. When she said, "This perfume was my mother's. She's dead now," Valentina smelled that fragrance, and her world collapsed. That perfume was identical to the one she herself had created 15 years earlier for her best friend, before betraying her in the cruellest way. And that little girl hid a secret that would change their lives forever. Valentina Ashworth sat at the table of the Ivy, London's most exclusive restaurant. 43 years old, CEO of Ashworth Couture, an £800 million empire built over 15 years of ruthless sacrifices. That evening she was to sign the most important contract of her career, the acquisition of the French fashion house Dubois, that would make her the third most powerful fashion brand in Europe. The perfect Burberry suit and Tiffany & Co. jewelry couldn't hide the emptiness that devoured her from within. Behind the apparent success lay a secret that had tormented her for 15 years. Once, Valentina had been just a young designer full of dreams, working in a small boutique on Bond Street. She had a best friend, Elena, with whom she shared a tiny flat in Camden. They shared everything: dreams, plans, even love for the same man, Marcus Whitfield, who seemed destined to marry Elena. But Valentina's ambition was stronger than any bond. When Marcus proposed she become his business partner, Valentina accepted without hesitation. In 1 week, Elena lost everything: job, fiancé, and best friend. The last time Valentina had seen her, Elena was pregnant and desperate, but Valentina had chosen success. Elena had disappeared from London that night, and Valentina had never heard from her again. The guilt had tormented her every night for 15 years. That evening, whilst waiting for the investors, Valentina noticed an 8-year-old girl moving between the tables with a small suitcase. She had long brown hair and worn clothes, but moved with natural dignity. Her intense green eyes shone with intelligence despite the obvious poverty. Sophie had been living for 3 years with her grandmother in a basement flat in Tower Hamlets, after her mother Elena died in an accident. The sick grandmother couldn't support them both, so Sophie sold small items to contribute to the meager family budget. That evening, Sophie had perfume bottles found amongst her mother's belongings. Elena had always loved creating fragrances. It was her hobby, and she had left several little bottles that emanated sophisticated scents. When Sophie approached Valentina's table, the woman initially felt annoyance, but something in that child's eyes made her hesitate. Sophie opened the suitcase and pulled out a glass bottle filled with golden liquid. She explained that she sold special perfumes, created by her mother before her death. Then she added the words that froze the blood in Valentina's veins. The perfume was her mother's, now dead, but when she smelled it, it was as if she were still with her. She opened the bottle, and a delicate fragrance spread through the air. Valentina immediately recognized that bouquet of jasmine, bergamot, and sandalwood. It was identical to a fragrance she herself had created 15 years earlier for Elena as a birthday gift. Elena had called it eternal friendship, an irony that now hurt like a razor blade. Valentina's hands began to tremble. She looked at the little girl with new eyes, noticing the shape of the face, the color of the eyes, even the way of moving her hands, everything identical to Elena. With a voice she struggled to keep controlled, Valentina asked what her mother's name was. The answer came like a punch to the stomach. Elena Thompson. The little girl told her that her mother always said she'd had a best friend in London, but then they'd quarreled over something important. Valentina's world shattered into pieces. The little girl before her was Elena's daughter, the child Elena had been carrying when Valentina betrayed her. But looking at Sophie more carefully, Valentina noticed disturbing details. She didn't just resemble Elena, but herself, too. The green eyes, the shape of the face, the curve of the lips. A terrible suspicion began to form. Sophie was born on 15th of May, 15 years ago, conceived the previous August, exactly during the period when Valentina was secretly seeing Marcus behind Elena's back, and there had been that confused night when all three had drunk too much. Valentina looked at her watch. The investors would arrive to sign the £50 million contract. But how could she think about business when she was facing someone who could be her daughter, dressed in rags and forced to sell perfumes on the street? Sophie politely asked if she wanted to buy the perfume for £10. Valentina took her wallet with trembling hands and gave the little girl £50. Sophie looked at her with wide eyes at the unexpected generosity and thanked her with a smile that broke Valentina's heart. The investors entered the restaurant, ready to sign the most important contract of her career. Valentina looked at Sophie, then at the investors, and for the first time in 15 years chose her heart over business. Valentina stood up and told the investors that an urgent family emergency had arisen. £50 million postponed for a street child. The representatives looked at her as if she'd gone mad. She asked Sophie if she could accompany her home to her grandmother. The little girl, suspicious but curious, agreed. The journey to Tower Hamlets was silent. Valentina watched the neighborhoods become progressively poorer, far from her golden world. The building in Tower Hamlets had peeling plaster and patched windows. Sophie led her through a courtyard where children played amongst hanging washing and rusty bicycles. This was the London that Valentina had forgotten existed. Grandmother Rose lived in a basement converted into 2 rooms. When she saw Valentina in her Burberry suit, her first instinct was suspicion. The flat was small but dignified, with photographs of Elena on the walls that made Valentina's heart clench. Rose continued to glance at Valentina, as if trying to remember where she'd seen her. Whilst Sophie told of the lady's kindness, Valentina began asking delicate questions about Elena. Rose told her that Elena had arrived 15 years earlier, pregnant and deeply unhappy. She'd always said that someone she loved had cruelly betrayed her, but had never revealed who. She'd moved there and worked hard to raise Sophie alone. Suddenly, Rose exclaimed with a mixture of recognition and accusation that Valentina looked remarkably like a girl in a photo Elena had shown her. She went to fetch a shoebox full of memories and pulled out the photo that made Valentina tremble. It showed her and Elena smiling in front of Big Ben. Rose recognized her immediately. This was Valentina, the one Elena had spoken about, the one who had hurt her. The silence was heavy. Sophie looked around confused, not understanding the tension. Valentina confessed who she really was and why she was there, telling of the betrayal and the guilt that pursued her. Then she asked the question that tormented her. Could Sophie also be her daughter? Rose looked at her in shock. She too had noticed unexplained resemblances in Sophie. She stood up and went to a hidden drawer, pulling out an envelope with the writing, "For Sophie, when she's old enough to understand." Rose opened Elena's letter, and her face paled. The letter revealed that Sophie was Marcus's daughter, but there was more. Elena had discovered that Valentina had not only betrayed her emotionally, but had also systematically sabotaged her work opportunities in London's fashion sector, spreading false rumors to eliminate competition. Rose declared with contained anger that her daughter had died poor and alone because Valentina had taken everything from her: work, love, friends. But in the letter, Elena also wrote that despite everything, she had never stopped loving Valentina like a sister. She hoped that one day Sophie could meet the woman who had been important to her mother, but only if she had become a better person. Valentina looked at Sophie and felt the weight of 15 years of wrong decisions. The disproportion was evident. Whilst Elena had died in poverty, she had become very wealthy. She couldn't bring Elena back to Sophie, but she could still make amends. With a firm voice, she told Rose that she wanted to care for Sophie, give her everything Elena hadn't been able to have. But Rose was skeptical. What did she want in return? Valentina understood that she had to prove sincerity not with words, but with deeds, even if this meant giving up everything she had worked for over 15 years. Valentina announced her decision with a determination that surprised everyone. She didn't want to buy Sophie's love, but to give back to Elena, through her daughter, everything she had taken from her. The plan was revolutionary. She would give up the Dubois contract to create a foundation in Elena's memory, dedicated to young designers without means. The foundation would be called Elena Thompson and would offer scholarships and work opportunities. But that wasn't all. Sophie would become heir to the company.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Which would be called Thompson Ashworth, publicly acknowledging the debt to Elena and giving Sophie the opportunity to realize her mother's artistic legacy. Rose listened in amazement. These weren't symbolic gestures. Valentina was offering to rebuild everything she had destroyed, transforming her empire into a monument to Elena's memory. Rose asked what would happen if Sophie didn't want this. Valentina wisely replied that they would wait until she grew up. Meanwhile, Sophie would have a home, education, freedom of choice. At 18, she would decide whether she wanted to have anything to do with her or not. Sophie approached with innocent curiosity and asked if she was her mummy's friend that Granny talked about. Valentina confirmed, explaining that she had made serious mistakes and now wanted to make amends. The little girl looked at her with that precocious wisdom, typical of those who have lived life's harshness too early. She said that her mummy had always taught her that everyone makes mistakes, but the important thing is to try to put them right. Rose evaluated Valentina for a long time, then made a decision that would change everything. If she was truly sincere, they would make a pact. For 1 year, Valentina would have to prove the authenticity of her intentions, coming to see them every day to get to know Sophie gradually. Valentina accepted immediately, knowing it would be difficult but determined to succeed. Rose sternly added one final condition. If she took on this responsibility, she could never abandon Sophie again. The little girl had already lost too much in her life. Valentina looked at Sophie and felt something change definitively within her. For 15 years, she had pursued success and wealth. Now she had the opportunity to do something truly important. She made a solemn promise. Sophie would never be alone again. 3 years later, all 3 of their lives had changed beyond all imagination. Sophie, now 11 years old, lived in a beautiful house in Kensington with Valentina and grandmother Rose. She attended a prestigious private school, but every afternoon returned to the Elena Thompson Foundation, which had become the beating heart of Valentina's new life. The foundation occupied a restored Georgian townhouse in Bloomsbury, with perfumery laboratories, fashion workshops, and classrooms where young talents studied and realized their dreams. In the main hall, a portrait of Elena smiled down on the young people working with her same passion. Valentina had kept every promise. Ashworth Couture had become Thompson Ashworth, and half the profits went to the foundation. The Dubois contract had fallen through, but building something meaningful gave a satisfaction that no commercial success had ever provided. Sophie had proved extraordinary, with her mother's artistic talent and a maturity that amazed everyone who knew her. She had begun experimenting with perfumes as Elena had done, and her olfactory masterpieces were already appreciated by experts. The relationship with Valentina had developed gradually, day by day, built on trust and respect for Elena's memory. Valentina had discovered that being Sophie's mum gave her a joy she had never known before. Rose, initially suspicious, had become the wisdom that guided the extended family. Her presence ensured that Sophie remained connected to her roots and her mother's memory. One spring afternoon, Sophie was working in the laboratory when Valentina reached her with a special gift, an antique box containing all the original perfumes Elena had created before her death. She explained that these had belonged to her mother and were now hers. Perhaps one day she would manage to create something even more beautiful. Sophie opened the box, and the familiar aroma of Elena's perfumes filled the laboratory air. For a moment, both felt Elena's presence, as if she were smiling, seeing her daughter surrounded by love. Sophie asked, with the vulnerability typical of 11-year-olds, if she thought her mummy would be proud of her. Valentina knelt beside her and looked into those green eyes so similar to her own, assuring her that her mother was proud of her every day, and that she was proud to have become part of her life. Sophie hugged Valentina spontaneously. In that moment, Valentina understood that she had finally found what she had been searching for all her life: a true family, built on love and redemption. In the evening, whilst helping Sophie with homework in the house that smelled of jasmine, Valentina reflected on how strange fate was. A betrayal from 15 years ago had led to a deeper love than anything she had ever experienced. The Elena Thompson Foundation had become a reference point for young artists throughout Europe. Thompson Ashworth was more respected than ever. Sophie was growing up happy and loved. Valentina had learned that true success isn't measured in money or power, but in the ability to improve the lives of those we love. Elena couldn't return, but through Sophie, her memory lived on in every perfume created, in every young person supported, in every moment of happiness. The perfume Sophie had offered that evening hadn't just been the memory of a lost mother. It had been the key that opened the door to a new life, a life where forgiveness was possible, where mistakes could be mended, where love could grow from the ashes of the deepest betrayal. Whilst Sophie studied, Valentina looked at a photo of the foundation where dozens of young people worked on their dreams, all protected by Elena's legacy, all beneficiaries of her sacrifice, transformed into opportunity. In a corner of the photo, almost hidden, was a portrait of young Elena smiling. Valentina felt a deep peace invade her heart. She had kept her promise. Sophie was never alone again, and Elena's name lived forever. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Valentina fell asleep in peace. She had found redemption in unconditional love for a little girl who had taught her that it's never too late to make amends, that true love can be born even from the most painful situations. The scent of jasmine filled the house, carrying with it Elena's memory and the promise of a future full of hope for Sophie. The circle had closed, but a new story had just begun. 5 years later, Sophie celebrated her 16th birthday. The party was held in the gardens of the Elena Thompson Foundation, with hundreds of young artists who had benefited from the program. Sophie had become an extraordinary young woman, with her mother's talent and Valentina's determination. In front of everyone, Sophie announced her decision to dedicate her life to continuing her mother's legacy, creating perfumes that would tell stories of hope and redemption. Valentina, now 50 years old, watched Sophie with infinite pride. She had given up an empire to build something greater, a family founded on love, and a foundation that had changed hundreds of lives. Rose, now 80 but still lucid, smiled seeing how pain had transformed into beauty. Elena was no longer with them, but her presence was felt in every breath of that celebration, in every smile, in every perfume that bore her name. The betrayal from 15 years ago had become the foundation of the most beautiful love story Valentina had ever lived. Not the romantic love that had destroyed Elena, but the pure and unconditional love of a mother for her daughter. That evening, as the party lights dimmed, Sophie embraced Valentina. Words weren't necessary. Both knew that Elena, wherever she was finally resting in peace. Her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. It had given life to a story of redemption that would inspire generations of young artists. The scent of jasmine still filled the air, carrying with it the memory of a mother who had known how to love even beyond death, transforming betrayal into forgiveness and pain into eternal hope. If this story has touched your heart, and made you believe in the transformative power of love and forgiveness, leave a like and share. Valentina and Sophie have shown us that it's never too late to make amends for past mistakes, and that true love can be born even from the most painful situations. Subscribe to not miss other incredible stories of redemption and hope. Hit the bell to always be the first to discover how destiny can transform tears into smiles.